In Natchez, the house sat above the river as if it had chosen the height for itself. White columns faced the road, tall and unbending. Their paint kept fresh even as the land beneath them grew tired. From the back porch, the ground sloped away toward rows of cotton that stretched like a measured sentence, each line repeating the one before it. The house was not merely a place to live. It was an instrument. It watched, it recorded, it commanded. Every person on the property understood where they stood in relation to it. Isaiah Booker rose before the sun because the house required it. Not because anyone told him to each morning. There was no need. Time on the plantation was not counted by clocks but by expectation. He washed at the pump, the water cold enough to sting his hands awake, and pulled on the same shirt he had worn the day before. By the time light reached the edges of the fields, he was already moving, already bent to a purpose that had been decided long before he was born. He worked where he was told. If the overseer nodded toward the cotton, Isaiah went to the cotton. If a basket was left too full, he lifted it. If the path needed clearing, he cleared it. No one asked his opinion, and no one waited for his answer. The work was not designed to exhaust him all at once. It was designed to last. In the big house, silence carried a different weight. Margaret Whitcomb woke later than the field hands, but earlier than she wished. The mornings were quiet in a way that unsettled her. Captain Thomas Whitcomb had been gone for months, called away by the war that seemed to take men from the land and return only letters, if anything at all. His boots no longer stood by the door. His voice no longer filled the hallways. What remained was space, too much of it, and the expectation that she would keep everything exactly as it had been. She moved through the house with purpose, not because there was so much to do, but because stopping meant hearing her own thoughts. The servants inside the house, those permitted closer to her life than the field hands, kept their heads down and their answers short. They knew her moods by the sound of her steps. They knew when to speak and when to vanish. Isaiah crossed into the house only when summoned. On that morning, the call came from the back steps. A sharp voice, clipped and impatient. He wiped his hands on his trousers before climbing the stairs, though no one would have noticed the difference. The doorway swallowed sound. Inside, the air smelled of polish and something faintly sweet, a scent meant to suggest comfort rather than work. Margaret stood near the table, a folded letter in her hand. She did not look at Isaiah immediately. "You were told to finish the west fence yesterday," she said. "It was finished, ma'am," Isaiah replied. His voice stayed low, neutral. He had learned long ago that volume invited correction. She turned then, her eyes sharp, measuring. "Then why did I see a post leaning this morning?" Isaiah considered his words carefully. Storm loosened the ground overnight. The answer was reasonable. That was its danger. Her mouth tightened. Excuses are what men make when they don't fear consequences. The room seemed smaller all at once. Isaiah felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the awareness that truth alone was never enough. He lowered his gaze. "I'll set it right, ma'am." "You'll do more than that," Margaret said. "You'll see that it doesn't happen again." It was not a command so much as a warning. Isaiah understood what she meant. The fence was not the issue. Nothing was ever just the thing named aloud. He nodded once and stepped back, careful not to turn his back too quickly. The house released him only when it chose to. From the doorway, Margaret watched him go. She told herself it was necessary to be firm. That order required reinforcement. That without her husband present, discipline fell to her alone. These were the words she used to steady herself. Yet there was something in the way Isaiah moved, quiet, contained, that unsettled her. He did not argue. He did not plead. His obedience was complete, and somehow that made it feel like a judgment. Out in the yard, Isaiah resumed his work, but his attention lingered on the windows of the house. He had learned to be aware of where eyes might be, even when none were visible. In Natchez, freedom was not only denied, it was replaced with surveillance. The land itself seemed arranged to remind him of that fact. As the day wore on, the sun climbed, and the labor continued without pause. The overseer passed once, said nothing. Silence could mean approval or simply delay. Isaiah did not assume either. By evening, the fence stood straighter than before. The ground around it had been packed firm. It was the kind of work done not for improvement but for proof. Inside the house, Margaret read the same letter again, her fingers creasing the paper. She imagined her husband's return, the way he would expect everything unchanged. She imagined explaining any disorder, any softness. The thought filled her with a quiet, simmering fear, not of the enslaved people beneath her authority, but of the narrow role she was required to maintain. When darkness settled over the plantation, the house remained lit longer than usual. Lamps burned in empty rooms. Outside, Isaiah lay on his pallet, staring at the dark, listening to the sounds of the place that owned his hours and claimed his silence. Nothing had happened that day that would be written down. No whip had cracked. No blood had been spilled. And yet, something had shifted. Power had been reminded of itself. Control had been asserted without touch. The house had watched everything, and it was not finished watching yet. The days after the fence were not different in any way that could be pointed to, and that was how Isaiah knew to be careful. On the plantation, the worst changes did not arrive like storms. They arrived like quiet decisions. A glance that lingered too long. A voice that called his name when it had no reason to. A task that pulled him from the open air into the sealed hush of the house. It began with errands. Margaret sent for him in the afternoon when the sun was high and the heat made the yard shimmer. The overseer waved him off without question. House business required no explanation to the fields. Inside, Margaret stood at the foot of the stairs, holding a basket as if it justified the summons. She did not meet Isaiah's eyes. Not yet. "Carry this up," she said, her voice even. "To the linen room." Isaiah took the basket. It was not heavy. That, too, made him uneasy. Heavy tasks were honest. Light ones were invitations to something else. He climbed the steps and followed her down the corridor. The house at this hour felt asleep, its rooms holding their breath. Servants moved quietly in distant corners, careful not to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Isaiah could feel them listening, not because they wanted to know, but because danger had taught them to. The linen room was narrow and clean, shelves stacked with folded cloth that smelled of soap. Margaret closed the door behind them. The click of the latch was a sound Isaiah heard as clearly as a shout. For a moment she said nothing. She stood with her hands on the basket, as if arranging the air itself. Then she spoke, not loud, not soft, controlled. "You're quiet," she said. Isaiah waited. Silence was safest. "I said you're quiet," she repeated. And this time there was a note of irritation, as if his stillness were an insult. "Do you always keep your thoughts hidden?" Isaiah swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." Margaret's eyes narrowed. She stepped closer. "Look at me when I speak." Isaiah raised his gaze slowly, the way a man might lift a weight he did not want to hold. Her face was pale in the dim light, her hair pinned too tightly, her mouth set in a line that did not know how to rest. "You are not afraid of me," she said, like an accusation. He did not answer. The truth was dangerous no matter how it was spoken. If he said yes, she would punish him for insolence. If he said no, she would punish him for lying. Margaret's breath caught, and for a second Isaiah saw something flicker in her expression. Something restless, hungry, and ashamed all at once. It was not affection. It was not warmth. It was the look of someone reaching for relief in a room where relief did not belong. "You will stay," she said. Isaiah's body tightened. "I need to return to the yard, ma'am." Margaret's eyes hardened. "You'll return when I dismiss you." Isaiah did not move. He could feel his pulse in his throat, steady and loud. His mind raced through the rules that had kept him alive. Do not anger her. Do not frighten her. Do not appear defiant. But cannot agree. Margaret stepped closer again, and Isaiah took a half step back without thinking. The movement was small, instinctive, and that was enough. Her hand rose. The slap was quick and sharp. Isaiah's head turned with it, the sting blooming across his cheek. He did not raise a hand. He did not speak. The room felt suddenly too small for air. "How dare you?" she hissed. though Isaiah had done nothing except exist in the wrong way. "How dare you step away from me as if I am?" She stopped, as if the word she wanted to use would reveal too much. Isaiah kept his eyes down, his jaw tight. He tasted blood where his cheek had caught his tooth. Margaret's voice dropped. "Do you know what happens to men who disobey in this house?" Isaiah knew. Everyone knew. Punishment could be made to look like discipline, and discipline could be made to look like righteousness. The law would not ask questions for someone like him. "No, ma'am," he said, because the right answer was always ignorance. Margaret exhaled through her nose, the way her husband might have done when annoyed. She was imitating authority, borrowing it like a coat that didn't fit. "I can have you whipped," she said, as if testing the words. "I can have you sent to the traitor. I can have you placed where no one will hear you if you call out." Isaiah's hands clenched at his sides. He kept his face blank. Inside, fear moved like an animal looking for a way out. Margaret took his silence for surrender. Her eyes softened, not with kindness, but with the relief of someone who had found a lever and realized it worked. "Good," she whispered. "You understand." What followed did not belong to Isaiah. It did not belong to him in the way his body had never belonged to him. The choice was not his to make, and that was the point. Whatever boundary Margaret crossed, she crossed it with the confidence of ownership. The house did not protest. The walls did not speak. The door stayed shut. When Isaiah left the linen room, he did so in the early evening, long after he should have been back at the yard. He descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling unreal, like walking through water. His hands trembled once, and he forced them still. The servants who passed him kept their eyes averted, but their faces were tight with something that was not curiosity. Outside, the air felt harsh and bright. Isaiah went to the pump and splashed water on his face until the sting masked what he could not name. His cheek had swollen. A bruise was already forming along his jaw. It was easier to explain a bruise than the rest. In the days that followed, Margaret sent for him again. Sometimes it was an errand. Sometimes it was nothing at all. Sometimes it was just the sound of his name spoken as if it were her right to shape the day around it. Each time, Isaiah tried to be smaller. He answered in fewer words. He moved carefully. He avoided looking at her. He avoided being alone. But the plantation was designed for isolation. It separated people the way it separated fields, with lines and fences and orders. And Margaret had learned that her loneliness could be fed by power. Isaiah's resistance was never loud. It was in his stillness, in the way he arrived a moment late because he had been held back by a task, in the way his eyes stayed down, in the way his voice remained flat, refusing to give her what she seemed to want. Some sign that this meant something beyond force. Margaret responded to that quiet resistance the way the plantation responded to all resistance, with punishment. A missing spoon became Isaiah's fault. A wrinkle in a sheet became Isaiah's fault. A lantern left untrimmed became Isaiah's fault. Small reasons invented reasons, reasons that could justify calling him inside and keeping him there longer. And when he was slow to obey, when he hesitated by a fraction, she made sure there were consequences. Once, she ordered the overseer to dock his rations for a day. "Carelessness," she said, as if hunger were a lesson. Another time, she had him made to stand in the yard after dark, hands behind his back, while mosquitoes swarmed his face. "So you remember," she said from the porch, her voice carrying like a thin blade. The threats did not need to be repeated. They lived in the air. Isaiah began to change. He spoke less to the other hands. He stopped laughing at the small jokes that passed like crumbs between people trying not to starve inside themselves. His shoulders stayed tense even at rest. He flinched when someone called his name too sharply. At night, he lay awake, listening, as if the house might reach out and take him even from the dark. And Margaret, instead of feeling shame, felt need. It came over her in waves. Restlessness, agitation, the sense that nothing in her world could satisfy her anymore. She read her husband's letters with a frown, as if the words were inadequate. She walked the halls at night, touching the wallpaper, the banister, the door frames, as if the house itself might soothe her. Sometimes she looked at Isaiah as if she were angry with him for what she had done. Other times she looked at him as if she were afraid he would disappear and take her secret with him. Her guilt did not make her stop. It only made her more unpredictable. On an evening when thunder rolled far away and the air was heavy with coming rain, Margaret stood at an upstairs window and watched Isaiah cross the yard. He moved like a man carrying something invisible, something too heavy for the arms. She pressed her palm to the glass. In the reflection, she saw her own face, tight, pale, and unfamiliar. Outside, Isaiah did not look up. He kept walking because looking up was dangerous. And the house, silent as ever, watched them both. The first sign of Captain Whitcomb's return was not the sound of wheels on the drive. It was the change in the house before anyone spoke his name. The servants moved faster. The air itself seemed to sharpen, as if the walls had been waiting to stand at attention. A rider arrived at mid-morning with dust on his boots and a message that was delivered directly to Margaret's hands. She read it once, then again, and the color drained from her face in a way Isaiah noticed even from across the hall. Her fingers tightened on the paper until it creased like something broken. He did not need to be told what it meant. Men came home from war with little warning when the war allowed it. And when they did, the plantation had to become a stage again. Order polished, silence enforced, every corner of the household made to look as if absence had changed nothing. Captain Thomas Whitcomb arrived before nightfall. Isaiah saw him from the yard first. The horse's head high, the man sitting straight despite fatigue, his uniform worn and darkened at the seams. He looked older than when he had left, not simply by months, but by something harder. His gaze swept the property with the practiced habit of command, field, porch, fences, workers, taking inventory. When his eyes passed over Isaiah, they did not linger. That was not mercy. It was the kind of disregard that came from certainty. A man like Whitcomb did not see Isaiah as a person who could alter anything important. He saw him as part of the machinery of his life. The captain dismounted and handed the reins to a boy. He stepped onto the porch without pausing, as if he had never left. Margaret met him at the door. She smiled too quickly. It did not reach her eyes. "Thomas," she said, voice bright with strain. He kissed her cheek with the briefness of duty. His hand rested on her shoulder a moment longer than necessary, as if testing whether she was still where he had placed her. "You've managed," he said. It was not praise. It was a statement that implied consequences had she failed. Margaret laughed softly, then stopped. The sound died as if she had heard herself and disliked it. "Of course," she replied. "Everything is as it should be." Captain Whitcomb looked past her into the house. "I'll decide that." From the first evening, the household tightened. Doors were closed more often. Conversations shortened. The servants seemed to move in lines rather than freely, as if the captain's presence had reintroduced rules that had loosened in his absence. Even the dogs were quieter. Whitcomb ate at the table like a man reclaiming territory. He asked about the cotton yield. He asked about supplies. He asked about the overseer's discipline. He spoke of the war in measured fragments. Skirmishes, marching, rumors, never emotion. He spoke like someone trained to keep his inner life behind a wall. Margaret listened with a fixed expression. She nodded at the correct moments. She refilled his cup before he asked. She did everything expected of her, and yet her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. Isaiah kept to the edges of rooms when he was inside, carrying trays, clearing plates, moving like a shadow. He had learned to disappear as a survival skill. Under Captain Whitcomb, invisibility was not simply safer. It was demanded. The captain disliked reminders that the enslaved existed beyond function. But something was wrong. Everyone felt it, though no one named it. Margaret began to change in small, alarming ways. The first day she wore a dress too fine for mourning, as if she were dressing for an audience that was no longer there. The second day she snapped at a servant for folding a napkin incorrectly, then apologized with a trembling softness that made the girl flinch anyway. The third day she dismissed Isaiah from a room too quickly, then called him back as if she had forgotten why. Captain Whitcomb watched these shifts the way he watched the fields, quietly measuring, noting patterns. At night, Margaret lay stiff beside him, her face turned toward the wall. He would reach for her with the blunt confidence of a husband who believed every right belonged to him, and her body would respond incorrectly, not with resistance exactly but with absence. Her mind seemed elsewhere, her breath too fast, her hands cold. Whitcomb noticed. He did not ask why. Men like him rarely asked questions that could suggest weakness in their authority. Instead, he began to observe. He noticed that Margaret spent more time near the upstairs windows. He noticed that she watched the yard with a focus that did not match her words. He noticed that the servants avoided certain halls unless summoned. He noticed that Isaiah, once just another silent figure, now moved with attention that did not belong to ordinary labor. It was the smallest things that revealed the truth. Not confession. Not discovery in the dramatic sense. Just observation sharpened by suspicion. One afternoon, Whitcomb stood in the study, pretending to read, while Margaret spoke too brightly about the pantry inventory. Her words tumbled. Unnecessary. Nervous. In the hall outside, Isaiah passed with a basket of linens, eyes down. Margaret's voice paused for half a heartbeat. Whitcomb's gaze lifted from the page. Margaret continued speaking, but her breath had changed. Whitcomb did not look at her directly. He did not need to. He watched the reflection in the dark glass of the study window. He saw her posture shift. He saw her fingers tighten around the edge of the table as Isaiah moved past. That was enough. From then on, the captain began to set traps without calling them traps. He would ask for a glass of water and watch who answered. He would send Margaret away for a moment and see whether Isaiah was summoned. He would walk the corridors at odd hours, his boots silent on the runner, listening for movement where movement should not be. The house, which had watched everything before, now watched with him. Margaret became more restless under this scrutiny. She grew distant, as if the return of her husband had not restored her comfort but destroyed whatever fragile arrangement she had built in his absence. She stared at Whitcomb with a strange dissatisfaction that frightened even herself. She took her meals in smaller bites. She drank more wine than she meant to. She snapped at the servants, then wept privately, then emerged again with her face composed as if nothing had happened. Isaiah felt the tightening of the noose in ways he could not explain. The overseer's eyes lingered on him longer. Orders were harsher. Tasks were assigned with unnecessary difficulty. Men in the yard watched him with caution, not because they blamed him, but because they knew what the captain would do when anger needed a target. The truth surfaced fully on a quiet evening when Whitcomb returned early from the fields. His boots were muddy. His jaw was set. Margaret was upstairs. The house servants were in the kitchen. The hallway was empty except for Isaiah, carrying a lamp toward the back rooms at Margaret's earlier command. Whitcomb appeared at the end of the corridor like a storm that had found a doorway. Isaiah stopped. Instinct told him not to run. Running was a confession, and innocence had never protected anyone anyway. The captain's eyes fixed on him. Not in curiosity, in selection. "You," Whitcomb said. Isaiah's throat went dry. "Yes, sir." Whitcomb stepped closer, slow and controlled, the way a man approached a problem he intended to solve with force. "Where were you headed?" Isaiah knew the wrong answer could be fatal, but he also knew the right answer might be fatal too. "To the back rooms, sir." Mrs. Whitcomb asked for the lamp. Whitcomb's mouth tightened, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. "She asked." Of course she did. The captain's gaze swept Isaiah from head to toe, as if searching for proof of insolence on his skin. "You've been in the house more than usual," he said, voice low. "You've been near my wife more than usual." Isaiah's hands tightened on the lamp handle. "I go where I'm told, sir." Whitcomb's expression changed, not softer, but colder. "Do you imagine that will save you?" Isaiah did not speak. Words were dangerous here. Whitcomb leaned close enough that Isaiah could smell sweat and leather and the faint bitterness of tobacco. "Men like you," he said quietly, "get ideas when order weakens." Then he straightened, and his voice rose just enough to carry. "Put the lamp down," he commanded. Isaiah obeyed, setting it carefully on the table. Whitcomb's hand closed around Isaiah's shoulder with iron certainty. "You will answer questions later," he said. "And you will remember who you belong to." Isaiah's stomach dropped. The captain's anger was not aimed at the war, or the world, or the loneliness that had hollowed his house. It was aimed downward, where blame was safest, where punishment had always been allowed. Behind them, somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked. The house listened, and Isaiah understood, with a clarity that made him dizzy, that truth was not something that set anyone free. On a plantation, truth simply decided which kind of suffering would be chosen. The captain had returned to restore order. And order, in Natchez, was built on someone else's pain. Captain Whitcomb did not shout. That was what made the moment worse. His hand remained on Isaiah's shoulder, as if the man beneath it were nothing more than a tool being repositioned. He guided Isaiah down the corridor with a calm that felt rehearsed, the kind of calm a person used when they wanted everyone else to understand they were in control. The lamp Isaiah had set down flickered on the table, throwing weak light against the walls. Its flame trembled as they passed, but the captain's pace did not change. Isaiah's mind moved too fast. He searched for words that could untangle what had already been decided. He searched for a way to speak without sounding guilty, without sounding defiant, without sounding like a man trying to claim an authority he did not possess. In the kitchen doorway, two house servants froze. Their faces were blank, eyes lowered, bodies turned slightly away, as if not seeing could protect them from being drawn into it. Whitcomb's voice cut through them. Outside. Isaiah was pushed through the back door. The evening air hit his face like cold water. The yard looked almost peaceful. Shadows across the ground, the soft sound of insects, the distant line of the fields settling into darkness. It was the kind of stillness that could trick a man into forgetting where he stood. Then the captain's fist struck him. It landed hard against Isaiah's jaw, turning his head with a force that made the world blur. His feet stumbled, and before he could regain balance, another blow came. Shoulder, ribs, somewhere deep enough to knock his breath loose. The captain did not strike wildly. He struck like a man who believed punishment was a craft. Isaiah did not raise his hands to fight. Fighting would have been called rebellion. Fighting would have made the story simpler for the men who wanted it simple. He tried only to protect his head, to stay upright, to keep from falling where boots could do worse. Whitcomb grabbed his shirt and drove him back against a post. The wood bit into Isaiah's spine. Pain lit across his body in sharp, clean bursts. "You think you can take what is mine?" Whitcomb said, low enough that the words felt meant for Isaiah alone. Isaiah's throat burned. He tried, voice cracking on the first sound. The captain hit him again, cutting the sentence in half. "No," Whitcomb said. "You do not speak." Isaiah tasted blood. He swallowed, and it tasted like iron. His vision narrowed at the edges, not from fainting but from the body's attempt to pull inward, to hide what could not be saved. From the porch, a door opened. Margaret stepped out, and for one brief moment she looked like she might run forward, like she might say something that would stop it. But she did not move. She stood at the top of the steps as if nailed there, her white hands gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles showed. "Thomas," she whispered. Whitcomb did not look at her. His attention remained fixed on Isaiah, and that was its own confession. If he looked at Margaret, he would have to acknowledge that the center of his rage belonged inside the house, not outside it. That was a risk to his pride he refused to take. "You will be quiet," he said, still facing Isaiah. "Go inside." Margaret's mouth opened. No words came. Whitcomb's hand tightened on Isaiah's shirt, lifting him just enough to make the pain throb in his ribs. "Look at you," he muttered, as if Isaiah's bruised face were evidence of Isaiah's sin, not his own violence. "No shame. No place in you that understands your station." Isaiah forced breath into his lungs. He tried again because some part of him still believed that speech was a human right. "I didn't," he began. Whitcomb slammed him against the post again, and Isaiah's back flared with pain. "You don't get to decide what you did," the captain said. "I do." That was the heart of it. Not truth. Not guilt. Authority. The overseer appeared from the dark edge of the yard, drawn by instinct and fear of being unprepared when the master called. 2 other men followed, their faces guarded, their eyes refusing to settle on Isaiah's injuries for too long. Whitcomb finally stepped back, breathing hard. He wiped his hand across his mouth as if Isaiah's blood had somehow marked him. "Bring him to the shed," he ordered. Isaiah's knees buckled, but rough hands caught him under the arms. Not kindness, not cruelty, just obedience to the power that kept them alive. As they dragged him away, Isaiah heard Margaret's voice again, thin as thread. "Thomas, stop. Please." Whitcomb turned then, finally giving her the attention she had wanted from the moment he returned. His eyes were cold. "You will not beg for him," he said. Margaret flinched as if struck. She took a step backward. The porch lamp threw light on her face, and Isaiah saw something he had never seen there before. Raw fear, not of Isaiah, but of the world she had built around herself. A world that was now collapsing. Whitcomb's voice rose so the overseer and the men could hear. "This is what happens when order is tested." He spoke as if making an announcement to the land itself. "Tomorrow," he said, "everyone will see what becomes of those who forget their place." The words landed like stones. Isaiah's head dropped. His cheek pressed against the rough fabric of one man's sleeve. The scent of sweat and dirt filled his nose. His body shook once, not with weakness, but with the effort of holding in a sound. If he cried out, it would be used against him. If he stayed silent, they would call it stubbornness. There was no path that did not lead through pain. In the shed, they dropped him onto the floor. Someone threw a bucket of water nearby. The door shut. Darkness wrapped around him, thick and absolute. For hours, Isaiah lay in the quiet, listening to his own breathing, counting the spaces between heartbeats. He tried to move and felt fire across his ribs. He tried to speak and tasted blood again. He forced himself to stay awake because sleep felt like surrender, and surrender felt like dying. Above him, somewhere in the big house, Margaret Whitcomb paced. She moved through rooms that had always made her feel safe. Rooms full of polished wood, embroidered curtains, portraits of family members staring from the walls with eyes that seemed suddenly accusatory. The house that had once comforted her now felt like a trap. Her husband's fury had ignited something she could not control. If Isaiah died, it would not end. It would spread. Whitcomb's rage did not only want punishment, it wanted restoration. He would restore his authority by crushing everything that threatened it, and Margaret had become part of that threat. She sat at the vanity and stared at herself in the mirror. Her face looked strange, like a mask. She imagined the plantation's whispers. She imagined the captain's cold voice, the way it had sounded when he ordered her inside. She imagined him turning his judgment toward her when he was finished with Isaiah. She had believed she could use power without consequence. She had believed the system existed to protect her. Now she understood the system was a machine. Protected nothing. It consumed whatever disturbed its balance. Enslaved, master, wife, servant. Anyone. Margaret pressed her palms to her temples. Her mind raced, not toward righteousness, but toward escape. Survival had always been easier for her than for Isaiah. She had never had to admit it. Now she felt it like a blade against her throat. A lantern burned low in the hall. Outside, the plantation slept in uneasy silence. Somewhere, a dog barked once and fell quiet again. Margaret's decision formed not like courage, but like panic. She found the key ring in the drawer where her husband kept it. Her hands trembled as she slipped it free. She moved through the house without lighting more lamps, her breathing shallow, every sound too loud. When she reached the back door, she paused, listening. The kitchen was dark. The servants were asleep. The night hid her the way it hid Isaiah. She crossed the yard toward the shed, her skirts catching on grass, her shoes sinking into damp ground. The shed stood at the edge of the property like something forgotten, but tonight it felt like the center of the world. She knelt by the lock, fumbled the keys, tried one, then another. Metal scraped. Her breath hitched. Inside, Isaiah shifted, sensing movement. He tried to sit up and failed. A groan escaped him before he could stop it. Margaret froze. "Isaiah!" she whispered, voice breaking on his name. For a moment, neither of them moved. The night pressed in. The plantation held its breath. Margaret's throat tightened. "If he does what he says he'll do," she murmured, as if speaking to herself, "there won't be anything left. Not for you. Not for me." She finally found the right key. The lock turned. The door cracked open, and cold air spilled into the shed. Margaret stepped back as if afraid of what she would see. Isaiah's shape in the darkness was low and still. When he lifted his head, his face was swollen in ways the lamp from outside barely revealed. His eyes, however, were clear enough to understand what this was. Not rescue, not kindness, a consequence. Margaret swallowed hard, her voice thin. "You're coming with me," she said. Isaiah did not answer. He could not afford to believe in her words. Belief was dangerous. Margaret's gaze flicked toward the house, toward the porch light, toward the sleeping rooms where her husband lay. Her expression was not heroic. It was hunted. "Now," she hissed, urgency sharpening her fear into command. Isaiah forced his hands under him and pushed. Pain flashed. His breath caught. He rose anyway because the alternative was tomorrow. And in that moment, under the weight of bruises, under the weight of a system that had denied him even the right to speak, Isaiah understood something terrible and true. This was not an act of love. It was the final, desperate scramble of a woman trying to outrun the fire she had started. And the plantation, as always, watched. They left the shed without speaking. Margaret moved first, holding the lantern low, its light hooded by her hand so it would not carry far. Isaiah followed at a careful distance, each step measured, each breath shallow. His body protested with every movement. Pain radiated from places he had not known could hurt. He did not ask for help. He did not reach for her arm. Whatever bound them together now was not trust. It was necessity. The plantation slept. That was the most dangerous part. Sleep meant certainty. It meant the guards believed the world was as it should be. It meant no one was listening for footsteps that did not belong. Margaret led him away from the house, not toward the road where wagons passed and neighbors might see, but toward the darker edge of the property where the land sloped down into trees. The air thickened there, heavy with the smell of damp earth and leaves. Insects hummed, indifferent witnesses to human fear. At the tree line, she stopped and turned to him. "This is as far as I go," she said. Her voice sounded strange to Isaiah, stripped of command and pretense. It was the voice of a woman who had run out of roles. She set the lantern down and pulled a small bundle from beneath her cloak. Bread wrapped in cloth, a flask of water, a knife that looked as if it had never been used. She placed them on the ground between them, then hesitated, as if unsure what gesture belonged next. "I cannot fix this," she said quietly, the words forced out as if saying them hurt. "I know that." Isaiah watched her hands. They trembled. He said nothing. There was nothing he could say that would make the past untrue. Margaret looked past him into the dark woods. "If I stay," she went on, "he will destroy everything. You first, then me." She did not say why. She did not need to. The system she had trusted would not distinguish between guilt and inconvenience. Once order was threatened, everything became expendable. "I will not follow you," she added, as if answering a question Isaiah had not asked. "There is no place for me on whatever road you take." Isaiah nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. She stepped back, creating space, as though afraid proximity itself might accuse her. "Go south," she said. "Follow the river until you can't see the house anymore. Don't stop until morning." Isaiah bent slowly and picked up the bundle. His hands shook, but he held it steady. He did not thank her. Gratitude would have been a lie. He did not curse her. That would have given her something she did not deserve, absolution through hatred. He turned toward the trees. Behind him, Margaret whispered his name once, as if trying it in a different shape. He did not look back. Looking back was a luxury for people who could afford memory. The woods closed around him quickly. The plantation light faded behind leaves and distance until it was only a pale suggestion. Then nothing at all. Isaiah moved by feel, guided by instinct and the river's distant breath. Each step took him farther from the place that had owned his hours, his body, his silence. Pain slowed him, but it did not stop him. Branches tore at his clothes. Roots caught his feet. Once, his leg buckled and he went down hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. He lay still for a moment, listening for pursuit, for shouting, for the thunder of hooves. Nothing came. He forced himself up again. Survival had taught him that stillness could be deadly too. Behind him, Margaret Whitcomb stood at the edge of the trees long after Isaiah disappeared. The lantern flickered beside her, its oil burning low. The house rose in the distance, white and waiting, a shape that had once promised protection and now promised ruin. She imagined Captain Whitcomb waking to an empty bed, to unanswered calls, to a shed that stood open. She imagined his fury turning inward, then outward, consuming what remained. She felt fear, sharp and immediate. She felt guilt, heavier and quieter. She did not feel redeemed. Margaret lifted the lantern and walked away from the woods, not toward the house, but toward the road that led north. She would leave before dawn. She would not pack carefully. She would not explain. Whatever story followed her would be written by others. The plantation would erase her quickly. It erased everyone eventually. Isaiah walked until the sky began to thin at the edges, the black of night giving way to a dull, colorless gray. Dawn crept in without ceremony. Birds stirred. The world continued, unaware that a life had been severed from one path and thrown onto another. By morning, the river appeared through the trees, wide and slow, moving south with a patience Isaiah envied. He followed its bank, keeping low, avoiding open ground. Each mile placed more distance between him and Natchez, more distance between him and a name that had been used to summon him into suffering. He was not free. Freedom required papers, protection, a world willing to recognize a man as more than labor. He had none of that. What he had was space, distance, the fragile gift of time not immediately claimed by someone else. Isaiah stopped once to drink from the flask. He washed his face in the river and saw himself reflected there, bruised, swollen, altered. He did not look away. He memorized the face the way a man might memorize a map he could not afford to lose. Then he turned downstream and walked. Years later, no record would note the night a man left the Whitcomb plantation on foot, carrying pain and silence in equal measure. No ledger would mark the absence properly. History would move on, as it always did, leaving gaps where lives had passed through. But the road remembered. It remembered the weight of his steps. It remembered the blood dried into the dust. It remembered a man who did not escape into triumph, but into uncertainty, and kept walking anyway. And that was how survival looked when no one was watching. If survival is the only choice left, does that make it freedom, or just another kind of sentence carried forward? Stories like this were not written to entertain, but to be remembered. If the story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every story you support helps keep these forgotten lives from being erased again.